To talk about the nervous system and how our nervous system controls our behavior. Uh, has a lot to do with what psychology is all about. The nervous system is composed of cells called nerve cells or neurons. The average human body has between 100 billion and 150 billion neurons. Neurons communicate with each other at a point known as a synapse. Another cell that protects and adds structure to the nervous system is the glial cell. And there's an equal number of glial cells to nerve cells. The neuron is composed of four major parts. The dendrites collect the information or the stimuli or information that transmits it to the rest of the neuron, and these are the dendrites. The soma or body, soma always means body. It's a cell body that contains a nucleus and serves to maintain the cell. This is the soma with the nucleus. The axon is the main transmitting apparatus. The axon terminals are where the neuron passes on the information to other cells. This long structure is the axon in both of these. Those are axons, and these are the axon terminals. Neurons can be classified in three basic ways: shape, size, and function. Multipolar neurons have many dendrites and a single axon, and that's what we see here. Most of the neurons on the vertebrate brain are multipolar, and that's it right there. Bipolar neurons have a single dendrite at one end and a single axon at the other. Most of the neurons on the sensory system are bipolar, especially those of the retina and the olfactory system. Monopolar neurons have a single branch coming off the soma that branches in two different directions. One branch will be the input direction, and the other will be the output direction. But there are axons going in both directions. We saw those right here. Right. Some neurons are very large and some are very small. Examples of small cells would be granule, spindle, and stellate neurons. Examples of large neurons would be pyramidal, Golgi, and Purkinje neurons. Functionally, neurons either receive stimuli, create a response, or connect the two. Sensory neurons collect the stimulus and pass the message on to the vast network of connector neurons or interneurons. Motor neurons connect to muscles or glands and create the response by making the muscles contract or by changing the activity of the gland. Neurons do not touch each other but communicate between the dendrite of one neuron and the axon of another across a gap known as the synaptic cleft. At the end of the axon is the axon terminal. The axons end in expanded areas called buttons or boutons, which is French for buttons. The end of the axon is known as the presynaptic zone. The area of the receiving dendrite is known as the postsynaptic zone. The message is actually transported by a chemical known as a neurotransmitter that is contained in spheres in the axons called synaptic vesicles. And these are the synaptic vesicles. This is the presynaptic zone. The message is coming down and it reaches the presynaptic zone. The vesicles will release the neurotransmitter into the synaptic cleft. The message is taken up in the postsynaptic zone and it's transmitted wherever it needs to go. One of the interesting areas of study dealing with the neuron are projections coming from the dendrites called spines. These spines seem to change with experience and have been known to change within seconds when an individual is exposed to a novel stimulus. And as you can see, they come in all shapes and sizes. And there we go. These are the dendritic spines coming off, and as you learn new material, you get a new dendritic spine, and now that information is being structured in a way so that you can remember it. The axon projects from the soma in an expanded area known as the axon hillock. The electrical impulse begins in the widened hillock and intensifies as it moves into the narrower axon proper. Almost all neurons have only one axon. However, some have axons that divide and form several branches. This branching is known as axon collaterals. When someone smashes their finger, the stimuli must follow a nerve pathway to tell the brain what has happened. Nerves that take stimuli from its point of origin to the central nervous system are called afferent neurons. When the brain or spinal cord sends back a message to the affected area, the neurons on the reply pathway are referred to as efferent neurons, afferent and efferent. The soma manufactures proteins that maintain growth and function in the neuron. This protein is able to make its way down into the distant areas of the axon and dendrites by a process known as axonal transport. The protein is moved along tiny hollow cylinders known as microtubules. Protein molecules travel down smaller rods inside the microtubules called neurofilaments and even tinier microfilaments. Glial cells are part of the neuronal system in that they provide structure to the neuronal groupings and help hold them in place, and they help maintain the neurons by feeding them. There are 4 types of glial cells: astrocytes, microglial cells, oligodendrocytes, and Schwann cells. Astrocytes are star-shaped glial cells, hence the name astro, that protect neuronal bundles, especially in the brain. The dura mater, a tough sheet that is wrapped around the brain for protection, is composed of astrocytes. Astrocytes contribute to the metabolism of the neurons and provide restorative protein to them. Microglial cells are very small, hence the name micro. They migrate to areas of injury or disease and remove debris from injured or dead neurons. It's the microglial cells that malfunction to cause Alzheimer's disease. And that's why the injured and dead neurons are not taken away, and they create problems in the brain, dead areas in the brain. Myelin sheaths that surround and protect the neurons are created by glial cells. These myelin sheaths not only protect the neuron, but accelerate the response of the neuron. Oligodendrocytes provide the myelin in the brain and the spinal cord. Oligodendrocytes means little tree cell. Schwann cells construct the myelin outside the brain and spinal column. Schwann cells are small, and each one will wrap itself around the axon to protect it and accelerate the response. When you look at the myelin formed around an axon, you will see that Schwann cells don't touch each other, but leave a gap between each cell. These gaps are known as nodes of Ranvier. And what will happen is the response will jump from one to the other. When an individual suffers a blow to the head, the injury tends to heal slower than a blow to any other part of the body. This is because besides causing localized damage, the glial cells become larger by taking on moisture. This is known as edema, and it may put pressure on the select part of the brain, causing malfunction. And that's one of the reasons why people go into comas, because the brain has swelled. And if you watch any television shows where they talk about these things, they talk about, well, there's swelling in the brain, and that's causing the person to be in a coma. This is very logical because the brain heals a lot slower than the rest of the body. You sprain your wrist, you sprain your ankle, in a week it's feeling better, at least the swelling has gone down. But in the brain, it doesn't work that way. The damage The damage is maintained because the brain needs to repair itself. And it isn't movement that it's talking about. So you can't pump extra blood into the area like you can when it hurts, of course, it swells up and then you get healing, uh, you get more blood into the area. And that blood in the area actually helps heal it. But it doesn't work that way in the brain. Well, the nervous system of the human body can be subdivided into two nervous systems, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is comprised of the brain and spinal cord. All the other nerves, other than the brain and spinal cord, are the peripheral nervous system. And there are pictures. There you go, the brain, spinal cord. This is the central nervous system, and everything else is the peripheral nervous system. Peripheral nerves are categorized by what part of the central nervous system they are connected to. Cranial nerves are connected directly to the brain. Spinal nerves are connected directly to the spinal column. Autonomic nerves in the autonomic nervous system are connected to glands and organs and trigger automatic responses from these areas. There are 12 cranial nerves that control sensory or muscular movements in the head or neck region. 4 of the nerves control the muscles of the eye and the eyesight sensations. 4 control the muscles of the neck, face, and tongue, and the sensations of tongue, sinuses, and throat. 1 controls the sensations of the inner ear. The vagus nerve controls the heart, lungs, and digestion. There are 31 pairs of spinal nerves, 1 pair on each side of the body. There are 5 segments of the spinal cord and column. There's the cervical nerves that are in the neck, and cervical means collar, as if it's a collar of a shirt. There are 12 thoracic nerves, that's torso. It's in the torso region. Thoracic means brace. There are 5 lumbar nerves, which is in the lower back, and lumbar means belt. There are 5 sacral nerves in the pelvic region, and sacral means girdle. And there's 1 coccygeal nerve, which means, coccygeal means tailbone. Actually, it means bottom. Coccygeal, and there you go, the 5. You can see how big the coccygeal nerve is. There you go, there's your neck right there. My wife has 3 of these things fused together because she was in an accident when she was in the military. She hyperextended her neck. She had to have 3 of her vertebrae in her neck fused together. The autonomic or automatic nervous system is divided into 2 nervous systems, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system prepares the body for action by shutting down normal functions, increasing power stores, and increasing sensory activity. The parasympathetic nervous system returns the body to a normal state after sympathetic reactions. When the need for action is detected, the sympathetic nervous system will dilate the pupils, improving eyesight, inhibit salivation, causing dry mouth, relax airways, allowing deeper breathing, accelerate your heart rate, stimulate sweat glands, stimulate the liver to release energy stores, slow digestion, inhibit kidney function, and constrict blood vessels in the skin. That's why you turn pale. The parasympathetic nervous system reverses that whole thing. It constricts your pupils, it stimulates salivation, it constricts airways, it slows your heartbeat, it stimulates digestion, it dilates blood vessels in the intestines, it dilates blood vessels in the skin, causing you to be flushed. So when you're excited about something, you may potentially turn pale. Oops. Have dry mouth, your palms of your hands will sweat, as weird as that is. And then when it all goes back to normal, everything reverses itself. The average human brain weighs about 1,400 grams, about 3 pounds. The major part of the brain is the cerebrum, which is divided into two hemispheres. Intellectual capacity seems to be contained in the surface of the brain. The surface area of the brain is increased through ridges and folding that triples the surface around the brain. The convolutions are called gyri, and the furrows are called sulci. Gyri and sulci. The brain contains four fairly distinct lobes that have four fairly distinct functions. The frontal lobe is in the front of the brain and is the seat of higher level thought. The parietal lobe is on the top of the brain and controls fine body movements. The occipital lobe is in the back and controls sight. The temporal lobe is on the side and it controls hearing. If an individual lost half their brain before they reached puberty, except for some fine motor movements, they would seem perfectly normal. The two hemispheres of the brain are connected by a mass of thick myelinated neurons called the corpus callosum. And as it turns out, females have a larger corpus callosum than males do. We're not exactly sure why, but it seems to be fairly common. We're going to talk about corpus callosum a lot, and the reason is because individuals who are FAS have fetal alcohol syndrome. When a mother drinks, it reduces the size of the corpus callosum, and eventually I will show you pictures of an individual suffering from fetal alcohol syndrome, and as you will see, the corpus callosum is almost absent. So the two hemispheres of the brain do not communicate. They can't communicate. That's what the corpus callosum is for, communication between the left and right hemispheres. If we cross-sectioned an individual's brain, we would see that some of the brain is made up of tightly packed, non-myelinated neurons that look gray. Other areas look white because of the myelinated neurons that make them up. Researchers have found that the larger the gray areas of the brain, the more intelligent the individual is. So that's why you're looking for gray matter. The outside of your brain is made up of gray matter. Inside, white matter. As the baby begins to develop from ever-expanding numbers of cells, the brain and the nervous system begin as a structure known as the neural tube. In the beginning, the smaller, more primitive parts of the brain develop before the intellectual portion of the brain, the cerebral cortex. The spinal cord develops, the medulla, the pons, and the cerebellum will all develop first. The cerebellum surrounds two areas that scientists consider an evolutionarily old part of the brain that they sometimes refer to as the reptilian brain. There are two portions of the reptilian brain: the basal ganglia, which means the basic nerve sheath, and limbic system, the border system. So there are two structures, the limbic brain and the basal ganglia, which is the reptilian brain. The basal ganglia includes the caudate nucleus. Caudate means tail. Putamen, which means stone. Wait a minute, I should be showing you all this. There's the caudate right there. There's a putamen right here. This thing right here is a putamen. Putamen's right there. The globus pallidus, pale sphere. There it is. Right there. That's the globus pallidus. The substantia nigra, which means black substance, and it's back here, and you can't see it in this picture. The limbic system is made up of the amygdala. Amygdala means almond. Where are you, amygdala? There it is. Oops, there it is right there. Amygdala. The hippocampus, which means seahorse. And this is the hippocampus. Looks like a seahorse. The fornix, which means arch. And that's the fornix. The end of the seahorse. The cingulate gyrus, which means round girdle. That's it right there. Girdle's the whole thing. Oops, I'm sorry. The olfactory bulb. It's not on here. Well, that's it right there. That's the olfactory. Well, it's a mammillary body. They don't. Okay. Olfactory bulb, the mammillary bodies, of course, are at the end. Mammillary body, fornix, and hippocampus are all in one structure. The largest organ in the center of the brain is the thalamus, or inner chamber. The thalamus acts as a connector between the upper and lower parts of the brain. The real controlling gland in the brain is the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is called the hypothalamus or lesser thalamus because it is below the thalamus. In reality, this tiny portion of the brain controls your hunger, controls your thirst, it regulates your temperature, controls your reproductive behavior, it controls the pituitary gland, which controls almost all of the body hormone secretions. Sorry, I needed a drink. Two of the most important areas of the midbrain are the tiny bumps known as superior and inferior colliculi. Colliculi means trough. The superior colliculi receives visual information. The inferior colliculi receives information about sound. The substantia nigra, or which means black substance, releases dopamine, and that's if it has too much dopamine, it causes schizophrenia. If it releases too little dopamine, it causes Parkinson's disease. As you can see, the substantia nigra they're really just tiny patches. And here are the superior and inferior colliculi right here. The reticular network formation runs, or reticular means network. Reticular formation runs from the midbrain into the medulla. This portion of the brain controls sleep, arousal, temperature regulation, and motor control. This is it right here, reticular formation. It is the reticular formation that arouses a person when their baby cries, the reticular formation. It's also the reticular formation that is damaged, and when you go into a coma, remember it controls sleep, arousal, temperature regulation, and motor control. And if you go into a coma, of course, you become paralyzed and you sleep. You can't be aroused. Now, here's a problem. The skull comes around here. If you're riding on a horse and you fall off the back of the horse, your head hyperextends, and if you hit the back of your head, the skull will chop right into here. Now, normally it doesn't sever your spinal cord, but what it will do is it will damage it to the extent that you get swelling in this area, and it will put the person into a coma. And the reason is because their skull comes down and it lands right here, and it affects the reticular formation, which causes edema. And sometimes it severs it, it damages it. The problem with edema, if it's on there too long, it can, if you have if you have fluid in any area of your body for an extended length of time, it will break down whatever the structure is. If it's on your knee, it will break down the cartilage in your knee. That's all, and it will kill tissue if it's there too long, because it's trying to repair. It's trying to take out all the damaged portion and repair it. And it will, if it takes out too much tissue, of course, then you have a problem. That's edema. That's one of the reasons why you need to, if you have swelling in any part of your body and it's there for an extended length of time, you need to go to the doctor, because you need to get that fluid out of that area, whether it's your knee or your feet. I mean, you can really mess up your ankles or your knees by having fluid in that area for too long a period of time. How long is that? It's it all depends on the area. So how do you reduce edema? Well, you take a diuretic, which will draw the fluid away from your body, and it usually relieves that pressure. My dad was having problems with his heart. His heart wasn't beating efficiently enough to take the fluid away from his to take fluid away from around his heart and out of his lungs. So his heart wasn't beating efficiently enough to do that. This is known as congestive heart failure. And one of the things, and his feet were swelling up, and so feet and ankles. And so one of the things that they did, they gave him Lasix, which is a diuretic to draw that fluid off. And if they can control the fluid, and if it you know, if it pulls the fluid away, then the damage will not be done. And of course, we took care of the situation. We didn't give him Lasix. We took him to the doctor. He's kind of a bullheaded guy. Didn't want to go to the doctor. Thought, oh, I can wait until after the holidays to go to the doctor. And we told him, no, let's get. If we don't take care of it now, you'll be dead before the end of the holidays. So we did it. The cerebellum is composed of tightly packed and folded neurons. The neurons in the cerebellum form an interesting fan-shaped structure that includes granule cells, Golgi cells, and Purkinje cells. Purkinje cells are contained in the middle layer of the neurons in the cerebellum. Purkinje cells are large multipolar neurons shaped like fans with many dendritic spines. These cells run from the surface of the cerebellum to the brainstem. The intricacy of the Purkinje cells allows the cerebellum to control both fine and gross motor functions of the body. The position of the cerebellum between the spinal cord and the thalamic center that communicate with the motor complex allows it to control motor function. And that's what a Purkinje cell looks like. The cerebellum leads into the pons, the first portion of the brainstem. The pons, which actually means bridge, is involved in motor control and sensory analysis. Information from the ear first enters the brain in the pons. The bottom of the brainstem is made up of the medulla, which means middle or marrow. The medulla controls both the neck and tongue muscles. The medulla also contributes to the regulation of breathing and heart rate. The main intellectual functions occur in the cerebral cortex. Cerebral cortex means external layer. The cerebral cortex, or gray matter, is six layers thick and contains between 50 billion and 100 billion neurons. The functions of the various regions of the cerebral cortex have been mapped and divided into 46 distinctive areas known in toto as Brodmann's areas. The most numerous neuron in the central cerebral cortex is the pyramidal cell. Pyramidal cells, dendrites, reach to the surface of the cortex and also spread out horizontally. These neurons seem to be arranged in columns. Many brain regions have distinctive geometric columnar patterns that seem to function as information processing units. Some columns begin at the surface and extend all the way to the white matter. The human cerebral cortex contains about 1 million cortical columns. Most cerebral communication runs vertically, but there are some areas of horizontal communication. And that's the way it looks like. Now you can see how organized all this is. It's all columnar. When somebody's suffering from schizophrenia, this is all messed up. It's not uniform. It's not columnar. The cortical columns of the neocortex are arranged in 6 distinctive layers. However, most communication is vertical, and select neurons will extend through several layers, some through all 6 layers. Besides the bony skull, the brain is protected by three protective sheets called meninges, or meninges is just Latin for membrane. The outer layer is a tough envelope of cells called the dura mater, hard mother. The middle layer contains an open portion known as the arachnoid, through which flows the cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid is the fluid of the brain. There's blood up there, of course, but the cerebrospinal fluid protects it. It surrounds it and it makes it works as a shock absorber. Cerebrospinal fluid is what we used to check if we thought somebody had meningitis. If we thought there was an infection in the brain, we would check the cerebrospinal fluid. The inner layer is a delicate membrane known as the pia mater or the gentle mother. So we got the dura mater on the outside, which is a tough mother. It's the tough mother. It's the envelope of cells. As you remember, the astrocytes make up the dura mater. Then you have the arachnoid, which is the open area. And last but not least is the second membrane, which is a little bit thinner and not as difficult to get through. And that is the pia mater. So if you're cutting into the brain, one of the things you have to do is get through the dura mater, which isn't easy. This is some tough stuff. Pia mater, there's not so much trouble getting into that, but the dura mater's tough. The brain is not a solid mass. There are four open areas called ventricles. We can see the ventricles here. This is a ventricle, this is a ventricle. Ventricles 1 and 2 are lateral ventricles in each hemisphere, and these are the 1 and 2. The 3 ventricle is between the hemispheres below 1 and 2, and that's it right there. And then 4 is in front of the cerebellum, and that's it right there. 4, 3, 1, and 2. Cerebrospinal fluid is produced in the choroid plexus, which means cerebrae, a portion of the lining of the ventricles. Cerebrospinal fluid is basically plasma or blood with the red and white cells removed. The functions of the cerebrospinal fluid include acts as a shock absorber for the brain. The brain floats in CSF, so the head movements do not disturb the brain. It collects nutrients from blood vessels and passes them on to the brain's surface. CSF becomes very important if you have an infection in your brain because that is how we detect it. I've done this many, many times. Working as a laboratory technician, I had to see if I could grow bacteria from CSF. Normally, nothing grows because it's sterile. But sometimes, every once in a while, somebody will come down with meningitis. And if that is the case, then the cerebrospinal fluid, instead of being clear, will be cloudy. And the clouds are bacteria and the white cells trying to fight the bacteria. Yeah, I guess I won't tell you the ugly stories. Because usually you don't see meningitis except in children, and especially as little babies. Their brain blood barrier is not as intact as it is in as your immune system develops. So usually, if you see a case of meningitis, it's 9 times out of 10 it will be a baby, and that's never very pleasant. Blood is supplied to the brain through 2 significant arteries that run on each side of the esophagus. The carotid, and carotid just means plunge into sleep. The carotid arteries. The vertebral arteries bracket the spinal cord and enter at the base of the skull. So there's actually 4 significant forms of blood going, or cells, arteries taking blood into the brain. And there they are. There's the 4 right there. Oops, move backwards. At the base of the brain, the carotid and basilar base arteries join to form a structure called the circle of Willis. The merging of these two cerebral arteries provides a backup in case blood flow is impinged in one of the 2 major arteries. And of course, the 2 major arteries are the carotid arteries. Despite the rich tissue of the brain and the myriad of viruses and bacteria seeking entry, infections in the organ rarely occur. This is because the capillaries in the brain are much smaller than the capillaries in other parts of the body. Substances in the blood will rarely pass into the brain. This is called the blood-brain barrier, as I was talking about before. An angiogram vessel picture is an X-ray of the blood vessels in the brain. If a stroke is suspected, an individual can be injected with a dye and the skull can be x-rayed to show possible hemorrhages, aneurysms, or occlusions. Occlusions means blood clots. Aneurysm means widening. So it balloons out a blood vessel area that weakens and it balloons. If it pops, if that balloon pops, you got a problem because then the individual will bleed out. This is usually the first test performed if a patient is suspected of having a stroke. They'll do an angiogram. A CAT scan, a CT scan, is an x-ray of a thin sliver of tissue. If a patient is suspected of having a tumor or a stroke, a CT scan would allow the physician to visualize the affected area. And in this case, it's a tumor. Whereas the angiogram and the CAT scan are both x-rays, the MRI uses radio waves and other magnetic energy to visualize the structures in the brain. Small changes in structure, as small as the myelin on an individual axon, can be visualized in this way. PET scans are machines that detect radioactive activity in the brain. The radioactivity comes from radioactive impregnated glucose injected into the subject. As the various areas of the brain metabolize the glucose for their activities, the researcher is able to see which areas are active with select tasks. The functional MRI differs from the MRI machine in the intensity of the magnetic signal used. Because the functional MRI is so powerful, it can detect minute differences in metabolism. This gives the researchers a similar picture as the PET scan, but without the radioactive injection. And this is a tumor. That's a tumor pre-surgery. You can see how large a chunk of the brain they took out, but they missed some. And that's what it looks like. Okay, that's it. I'll talk to you next week, and I'm not going to